for it. So, Kerem, I'd love to know, we've touched on the minimum pay guarantee, and I guess the name sort of implies what it means, but can you tell us how the minimum pay guarantee works in Seattle specifically?
Yeah, no, that's great to sort of delve into it. Yeah, as the name implies, drivers are guaranteed a minimum per minute and per mile rate. Let me just grab the numbers because I too many numbers and I forget that. The current rates are 57 cents per minute and $1.33 per mile
Cool.
on every trip that's for passenger time, every trip in Seattle. There's also a guarantee that if you have a super short trip there where you wouldn't have made $5 based on just the per minute and per mile, you get a minimum of $5. If you're driving
Oh,
someone just
nice.
across downtown, five or 10 blocks, you're gonna get at least $5. And that's actually a good example of key driver feedback. I think
Yeah.
during the iterative process, there was a point where that was not part of the policy. And we heard from drivers like, hey, what about really short trips?
Yeah.
They're not worth our time. We have to drive to the location, and then it ends up being super short. And so that was a way to address those concerns.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't even realize the minimum fare of $5 was in there, but that's definitely a good one to have. And I guess these rates, are they before or they're after Uber's cut from the thing? So like if I'm a driver, I actually get $5 to my bank account.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, those are that is not yeah that is what the driver must receive. The
Yeah,
per minute, the per mile, and the $5
yeah.
what the driver has to receive.
Yeah, I
And
mean, one
it's
thing too that sorry to interrupt, but briefly, I mean, just the 57 cents per minute is kind of interesting too, because that's, on the higher side of, what we've seen for the waiting rate. And this is, again, one of the complaints. So I'm curious if you've talked to drivers, I'm sure you got some feedback, but, waiting does not pay very well on Uber and Lyft, right? Typically, if you're much less and passengers want to make a stop, or if, they kind of keep you waiting to come outside, right? Like you don't get paid much. You kind of almost need the wheels to be moving in order to make money. So it's kind of cool to see that, it's not outrageously high, but it's a little higher than normal.
Yeah, and this may be getting a little too much in the weeds. The way those numbers are derived is the
Mhm.
per minute is the equivalent of Seattle minimum wage,
Mm.
but increased to cover time when you're driving to the passenger location and
Mm.
time between trips when you're waiting to get
Got it.
paid.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, that makes sense because it's 57 cents per minute. So that's about $34.20 per hour. So if you're only busy about half the time, it's kind of 17 and then a little bit of drive time. So you're at about that $15 an hour, it sounds like kind of
yeah,
rough math.
yeah, that was pretty good rough math. Yeah,
I
and so
used to be
that
an engineer. I polish it. I bring it out of the closet once in a while. My math skills, I have to be fully caffeinated and, right in the middle of the day. Can't be too early or late.
Yeah, and so I mean that was kind of the underlying goals
Hmm.
of the policy was we want it to be a fair wage, a living
Yeah.
wage that's at a minimum Seattle minimum wage, plus compensation for expenses, and it compensates drivers for all of their time. So
Yeah.
passenger time, driving to the passenger location, and the time in between trips. So those were kind of like the big animating
Yeah.
features
Yeah.
of the policy.
So I really like. I feel like obviously this is the reason why I wanted to have you two on the podcast because I'm a big fan. If anyone couldn't tell, I'm a big fan of a lot of the ordinances and regulations you guys have passed. So forgive me if I keep saying I really like this, I really like that, but I have not been a fan of other minimum pay guarantees. Like one of the reasons though I did not like Prop 22 in California was because that it only covered that engaged time, right? And I think the analogy that people have been using is you walk up to McDonald's and you're a cashier and you only get paid when you're talking to a customer, right? As soon as the customer leaves, it's like start the clock. You're not getting paid anymore, which is pretty ridiculous in that context. And I think why I think it's important is because it really aligns the incentives between the companies and the drivers, right? Because if you have this situation where they kind of have to cover your downtime, they're probably not going to send you out into the middle of nowhere and make you drive back empty, right? For example, which right now those are kind of like the tough choices that drivers have to make. So I imagine that was sort of the impetus for the fully covered time.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, and I actually like that analogy. I think it's a pretty good one.
I
That you
unfortunately
give.
didn't come up with myself. I definitely stole it from someone else. So.
Yeah, yeah. But no, we had just heard from drivers that we think we're doing work that
Hmm.
benefits the companies,
Yeah.
even when we're between trips. And I think you
Right.
see that in how they market themselves, particularly in the early days, vis-a-vis as in opposition to taxis, right? Is that you will get a trip within 5 minutes or whatever it was, right? And that's only possible because they have a lot of folks
Right.
sitting, a lot of drivers out there waiting to get a trip assignment. So if they're kind of doing this work that is benefiting the TNCs, and their time isn't their own, that does need to sort of be, we thought was important to be included as part of how you determine compensation.
Yeah. And I mean, I think historically, I mean, this is sort of what my site talks about a lot is like we kind of call it being a cutthroat driver, right? So, for example, if you're driving in downtown Seattle and you get a trip request, way out into an hour east and during rush hour into the middle of the nowhere, and basically that you're not going to get a trip back, it's actually more profitable for you to decline that trip and stay in the city center than it is to take it. But, Uber sort of makes it very difficult to do that, right? You don't see where the passenger is going until you arrive. They get in the car, you start the trip. It's very awkward. That's why you have to be a really cutthroat driver. You kind of have to not care, sorry, I got to pick up my kids. You're out of here, type of situation. And so, in this, with this sort of minimum pay guarantee, it kind of alleviates that situation because if Uber does send you out there, they're going to have to cover, you to get back, for example, so, in an indirect way. So I think that's pretty cool. And I mean, I guess I'll ask you the same question, Kerem. How long has this been in place for, and how's it going?
Yeah, so it went into effect the first of the year.
Hmm.
It's a little bit longer, but we are still kind of in early days of trying to assess, what the impacts are. We will be getting some more data directly from the companies, which is sort of just coming on stream. That is going to allow us a lot more visibility into that,
Yeah.
and so that's definitely something we're looking forward to have a self-critical eye to say, hey, is it working the way we intended? Does it need adjustments? Are there things we need to think about? And again, with that lens of, it is completely unprecedented what is happening, in general in the economy and
Yeah.
specifically in the rideshare industry. I think before, in the run up to this policy, there's lots of charts of ride growth and all this, and then that's thing is just completely upended by the pandemic, and so there's a lot of unknowns that we need to assess. But one thing we are hearing again is that folks who are working just incredibly long hours now feel like they have a more balanced kind of situation. We've also heard about like just consistency, knowing that if you get a ride in Seattle, you're going to be paid at a
Yeah.
certain rate, and so that allows folks to sort of plan. Hey, if I do these 3 rides or these 10 rides or whatever the metrics are, I'm going to make X, and that's what I need to meet what my targets are. And so being able to plan and have a little bit more predictability is the other piece of feedback we're hearing.
Yeah. And I guess